Chapter 14. Calculation of the increase of the Quendi. The two texts presented here are written in a generally clear hand, in black nib pen on 9 sides of 10 sheets of unlined paper. Subsequent additions and corrections were made in red ballpoint pen. There is no clear indication of date, but given its general character and the fact that it evidently precedes the text presented here as Chapter 16, note on the youth and growth of the Quendi below, since unlike that text, elves here still have a 9-year gestation period, it can be confidently dated to c. 1959. Note that the dates of the finding and awaking as revised agree with those appearing ab initio in text 3 of Chapter 13, key dates above. Text 1. Calculation of the increase of the Quendi from the awaking to the beginning of the Great March. Footnote 1. Increasingly rough notes and calculations found on the verso of what is now the last of this small bundle of sheets and subsequently struck through in red ballpoint pen appear to be draft material for what became the first scheme presented here. A better calculation. First elves produced a second generation at once. It begins, therefore, to appear in VY 1000 or 9 and only takes about VY 1 or 9 to complete. All the 72 original pairs are wedded and produce an average of 6 children each. The time at which the succeeding generation begins to produce the next generation steadily increases. First generation at once, 24. Second generation plus 6, which is 30. Third generation plus 6 is 36. Fourth generation plus 6 is 42. Fifth generation plus 6 is 48. Sixth generation plus 6 is 54. Average product wanes from 6 in first 3 gens to 5 in gen 4 to 4 in gen 5 to 3 thereafter 6 thereafter. Also, the proportion of available pairs that actually wed is reduced. 1. The exactitude of proportion of males and females is not maintained. 2. Not all can find mates. 3. Various accidents, so that after the first generation, the pairs will be overestimated if the previous generation is divided by 2. A proportion increasing from 1% through to 10% must be deducted in each generation. Thus, first elves, second gen appears in VY 1000/9. End footnote. First elves awoke at maturity. Population 144. Began at once to engender the second generation. This, therefore, with the first births will begin to appear in VY 1000/9. It will take VY 1/90 asterisk reckoned from the first begetting to the last birth. That is, 6 periods of gestation, 9 years, plus 5 intervals of an average of 36 years each, times increase 12/24/36/48/60. 6 times 9 equals 54, plus 5 times 36 equals 180 equals 234 years equals VY 1/90. And asterisk. Years to complete, i.e., up to date of last births. All 72 pairs of destined spouses wed, and the average family is 6 per pair, and VY 1001/90, therefore, the increase will be 72 times 6 equals 432, population 576. After this, various things that modify this first process must be considered. A. The age at which the new generations begin to beget children will slowly increase by 6 coemendi equals 6 VY on an average until 48 is reached, which will then remain the average age for a very long time. First elves at maturity, 24, second generation at 30, third generation at 36, fourth generation at 42, fifth generation, and many later generations at 48. B. The length of time in which a generation is completed, as C. The average intervals between births, also increases while becoming, in cases considered individually, more variable, but probably an average time for the completion of a generation from first begetting to latest birth, for the completing of all generations after the first until the Eldar reach Valinor, may be set at 2Vy equals 288 lower. Footnote 2. As first written, the average was V2/6 equals 294 lower. End footnote. This will be irrespective of the actual average number of children produced in each family, since as this number falls, the intervals between births also rise. Footnote 3. The text originally continued as follows on the verso of the sheet before the whole side was subsequently struck through in black ink. This average, V2/6, represents 294 lower, made up of 6 gestations, equals 54 lower, plus 240 lower, representing 5 intervals of 48 lower for 5 births, 60 for 4 births, 80 for 3 births, and 120 for 2 births. 1. Average production of children per pair also decreases from 6 in generations 1, 2, 3 to 5 in generation 4, to 4 in generations 5 to 3 thereafter in generation 6 and subsequent generations at least up to arrival in Valinor. 2. After the production by the first elves and their destined spouses of 2 generations, the proportions of males and females vary, the remaining never be far from equality. Not all, however, could find spouses. Already a few did not desire them, and there were various accidents and losses, increasing when Sauron discovered their dwellings, so that the wedded pairs cannot be found by dividing the number of each generation by 2, a proportion beginning with 1% of 2 gen and increasing by 1% in each succeeding generation until 10% is reached, must be deducted from the complete 100ths of each generation before division by 2. If these factors are taken into account, we shall be able to calculate with reasonable accuracy the increase of the Quendi from VY 1000 until the finding by Orome in V. Tolkien here leaves the date blank, presumably pending further calculation. The first generation of first elves numbered 144. In V1001/90 they had completed the 2 gen which numbered 72 times 6 equals 432, Pop 576. The second generation began to appear in V1000/9. It began production of 3 gen after 30 years from that date. In a further V2/6, it had completed the 3 gen of 6 children per pair in V1000/39 plus. The rejected text ends here at the bottom of the page in mid-sentence. There are, however, 2 marginal notes added in red ballpoint pen that read, time between first and last births of each generation, therefore VY2/6 minus 9 equals 285 lower, or VY1/141. If VY2/6 is needed for first birth to last birth for a generation, this will allow a small margin for illegible. End footnote. This average of VY2 equals 288 lower reckons from the first begetting to the last birth. The period would probably be for 6 children, 294 lower, for 5, 285, for 4, 288, for 3, 287, averaging at 288.5. Asterisk. Thus, gestations of 9 lower each, 6 gestations equals 54 plus 5, intervals of average 48 equals 240, total 294 lower. 5 gestations equals 45, plus 4 intervals of average 60 equals 240, equals 285 total lower. 4 gestations equals 36, plus 3 intervals of average 84 equals 252, total is 288 lower. 3 gestations equals 27 plus 2 intervals of average 130 equals 260. Total is 287 lower. The grand total being 1,154, leading to an average of 288.5 lower. And asterisk. C. Average production of children per pair or family also decreases from 6 by first, second, and third generations to 5 by the fourth generations to 4 by the fifth gen to 3 thereafter in the sixth gen and subsequent generations, at least up to arrival in Valinor. Footnote 4. In the event, as will be seen, the first table of generations Tolkien produced following this statement actually shows 6 children per pair for generations 1 through 4, 5 in the 5th gen, 4 in the 6th gen, and 3 in the 7th gen. And footnote D. After the engendering by the first elves of the 2nd gen, the proportion of males and females varied, not being equal, though remaining always near to an equal division. Thus not all could find spouses, already a few did not desire marriage, and there were various ill chances and losses, especially after Sauron discovered the Quendi. The wedded pairs therefore cannot be found by dividing the numbers of each generation by 2, a proportion beginning with 1% of the 2nd gen and increasing by 1% in each following generation until 10% is reached, must be deducted from the complete 100ths before division by 2. If these factors are taken into account, it is possible to calculate with fair accuracy the increase of the Quendi from the date of their awakening until their finding by Orome 90 VY later, or any other date decided upon. Footnote 5. The clause or any other date decided upon is an addition in red ballpoint pen, as is the tabular footnote of intervals. And footnote. At 2nd generation, first birth VY0/9, last birth VY1/90, increase 72 times 6 is 432. The resulting total population is 576 after the starting population of 144 before the increase. Footnote 6. The population column was an addition in pencil beside the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th gen entries in the left margin. Tolkien later wrote in red ballpoint 865/9, 866/90, 873/18, 876/99, and 887/27, 892/108, respectively. Apparently, the dates of first and last births of those generations in a revised chronology where the elves awake in FA 865. And footnote. In the 3rd generation, the first birth is VY0/9 plus age 30 equals VY8 plus 9 equals VY8/18. The last birth is VY1/90 plus VY8/9 plus VY2 equals VY11/99. Increase 432 minus 1% divided by 2 equals 214 times 6 equals 1284. The resulting total population is 1860. In the 4th generation, the first birth is VY8/18 plus age 36 equals VY14 plus 9 equals VY22/27. The last birth is VY11/99 plus VY14/9 plus VY2 equals VY27/108. Increase is 1284 minus 2% divided by 2 equals 630 times 6 equals 3780. The resulting total population is 5640. In the 5th generation, the first birth is VY 22/27 plus age 42 equals VY 20 plus 9 equals VY 42/36. The last birth is VY 27/108 plus VY 20/9 plus VY 2 equals VY 49/117. Increase is 3,780 minus 3% divided by 2 equals 1834 times 5 equals 9,170. The resulting total population is 14,810. 6th generation, the first birth is VY 42/36 plus age 48 equals VY 26 plus 9 equals VY 68/45. The last birth is VY 49/117 plus VY 26/9 plus VY 2 equals VY 77/126. Increase is 9,170 minus 4% divided by 2 equals 4,401 times 4 equals 17,604. The resulting total population is 32,414. In the 7th generation, the first birth is VY 68/45 plus age 48 equals VY 26 plus 9 equals VY 94/54. The last birth is VY 77/126 plus VY 26/9 plus VY 2 equals VY 105/135. The increase is 17,604 minus 5% divided by 2 equals 8,362 times 3 equals 25,086. The resulting total population is 57,500. The number of the Quendi, therefore, at about 106 Valian years after their awakening, would have been about 57,500. But if Orme arrived in VY 1090, that would be before the first births of the 7th gen, and the youngest of the 6th gen would be VY 90 minus VY 77/126, or nearly 12 VY old, equals elf men VY 2 equals 24, plus VY 10 equals 10 equals 34. Elf women VY 1.5 equals 18 plus VY 10.5 equals 10.5 equals 28.5. They would all be fully mature and marriageable, and though the beginning of the 7th gen would in undisturbed circumstances have probably been delayed for another 4 VY or nearly so, the change of life might alter that. Also note that the eldest men of the 6th gen would already be over age 43, while the youngest women would be over 28 and past the ordinary marrying age. So that from at least the 6th gen, or indeed the 5th gen, we have to reckon with marriages within a generation and the loss of an unmixed sequence. Footnote 7. This paragraph entered as a marginal note, written in red ballpoint pen. End footnote. On the above calculation, if there were a total of 32,414 Quendi at the end of the 6th gen, this would be the total population when Orme found them in, say, VY 1090, 90 VY later. The youngest would then be 30 in age. The company should be still in approximate proportion of 14/144, 56/144, and 74/144. If we take the actual total to be 32,400, these proportions would be exactly 3,150, 12,600, and 16,650. But many of the Quendi will become Avari, say 1/3 of total, equals 10,800. The marchers or Eldar then will number 21,600. 1/72 of this is 300. Therefore, the Vanyar will be 2,100. The Noldor 8,400 and the Lindar 11,100. This suffices, barely. There will probably be increase on the march and greater increase in Valinor, but more would be better. And the time required is far too great. 90 VY equals 12,960 sun years. This is much too long for the Quendi to be left unguarded and at the mercy of Melkor and Sauron. In the original scheme, only 85 times 10 equals 850 years was allowed. Footnote 8. It is unclear where Tolkien's figure of 850 years comes from. In the Annals of Aman of the early 1950s, the elves awoke at Cuivianen in VY 1050 and Orome discovered them in VY 1085, 1071-2, which means that they were left unguarded for 35 VY, which in the scheme in effect at that time was 350 sun years. Tolkien may have forgotten that at that time the elves did not awake in VY 1000. And footnote. But if the time is reduced, the rate of increase must be very greatly raised. The Quendi in the first few generations before the march or reaching Valinor must, as is quite reasonable, be made far more eager for love and the begetting and bearing of children. They must have larger families at shorter intervals between births. The Valian years of the trees should be duodecimal, let VY 1728 be the death of the trees. In the older scheme, about 400 VY equals 4,000 years, covered events from the finding to the darkening of Valinor, but elves now live at a rate 14 times or more as slow. We can allow about 48,000 years, or on present scheme about 333 and a third VY, said 336, or 12 times 28 equals 48,384 lower, or 324 equals 12 times 27 equals 46,656 lower. In that case, the finding should take place about 1728 minus 336 equals 1392. The awakening should take place not more than 6 VY equals 864 years, previously that is in VY 1386. The entry into Valinor could be later by 12 VY, later allowing for a long sojourn of Orome and negotiations, and for delays on the march, or perhaps better, only 6 VY, SC, early VY 1404 or 1398. In these 6 VY, the Quendi must increase to over 30,000 from 144. Let the first elves awake in VY 1386, with the finding in 1392. Between VY 1386 and 1388/94, all 72 pairs wed and at once produce 12 children each, equals 72 times 12 equals 864. Population equals 1008. Between VY 1386/9, first births, plus VY2 maturity equals 1388/9, and 1388/84 plus 2 VY plus VY2/84 equals 1393/24. 430, not 432 pairs wed and produce 12 children each equals 5,160. Footnote 9. Tolkien here actually wrote 1388/84 plus 2 VY plus VY2/84 equals 1392/24, but this is an error. The correct total is 1392/168 equals 1393/24, which I have provided. Similarly, I have corrected the subsequent calculation from VY 1392/24 plus VY2 plus VY2/84 equals 1396/108. And footnote. Population equals 5,738. Footnote 10. This figure derives from the original number of children Tolkien assigned to each pair, 11, multiplied by the number of pairs, 430, and the corresponding increase of 4,730. Tolkien later changed the number of children to 12 in accordance with the number born to each pair in the first and third generations, and revised the increase to 5,160, but he did not revise the figure for the total population. However, he nonetheless used the new increase of 5,160 to derive the number of pairs in the third generation as c. 2,580. I have therefore let the mathematical error stand to show the intended scheme, even though the numbers do not add up. End footnote. Between VY 1388/9 plus 2VY equals 1390/9 and VY 1393/24 plus VY2 plus VY2/84 equals 1397/108, 2,500 pairs, not 2,580, and produce 12 children each, equals 30,000. Population equals 35,738. About this time, the Great March begins. It is not necessary to have quite so many as 35,738 Quendi, and their generation need not be quite so prolific and precipitate. Footnote 11. I cannot account for the fact that immediately following this statement, which begins a new page but is not evidently a marginal note, Tolkien presents a new scheme in which the Quendi are in fact much more prolific and precipitate in producing offspring. End footnote. Elves Awake, VY 1386. Population 144. The first elves at once beget children, and in their joy and vigor begin at once and beget 12 each pair on average. 12 times 72 equals 864. These, the first births, will take place therefore in 1386/9 and the last after VY 1/96 years. 12 gestations of 9 years equals 108 plus 11 intervals of 12 years equals 132 equals 240 equals VY 1/96, 1387/96. Population equals 1008. Second gen firstborn 1386/9, lastborn 1387/96. First births 1386/9 plus VY2 maturity plus 9 equals 1388/18. Last births 1387/96 plus VY2 plus VY2/18 equals 1391/114. VY2/18 represents rise of interval to 18 years. Footnote 12. The total gestations plus intervals time of VY2/18 equals 306 years. Here is inconsistent with the reduction of the number of children born to each married pair, even with the increase of the individual interval from birth to next conception to 18 years. Since there is an average of 11 offspring of the third gen for each married second gen pair, the total time of gestation should be 11 times 9 equals 99 years, and the total time of interval should be 10 times 18 equals 180 years, for a total span from first conception to last birth of 279 years equals VY 1/135. It appears that Tolkien has instead calculated the times as 12 gestations times 9 equals 108 plus 11 intervals times 18 equals 198 equals 306. It may be that Tolkien had not yet settled on a reduced number of children per pair in the second to fourth generations when he made these calculations, but there is no indication that the calculations of increase were a later insertion. End footnote. 430 pairs times 11 equals 4730. Population equals 5738. Third gen firstborn 1388/18 plus VY2 plus 9 equals 1390/27. Lastborn 1391/114 plus VY2 plus VY2 slash 84 equals 1395 slash 198. VY2 slash 84 represents rise of interval to 24 years. Footnote 13. Similarly, the figure of VY2 slash 84 equals 372 years here and in the 4th gen seems to be a calculation based on 12 gestations times 9 equals 108, plus 11 intervals times 24 equals 264 equals 372. End footnote. 2350 pairs times 10 equals 23,500. Population equals 29,238. 4th gen firstborn 1390 slash 27 plus VY3 plus 9 equals 1393 slash 36. Lastborn 1396 slash 54 plus VY3 plus VY2 slash 84 equals 1401 slash 138. 11,500 pairs times 9 equals 103,500. Population 132,738. Footnote 14. In both cases, VY3 as a time to maturity was altered by Tolkien from VY2, and in the first case, the correction was underscored in red ballpoint pen. End footnote. Text 2. There remains a curious final scheme. Final in the sense that it is now on the recto of the last sheet in this small bundle, but that it is in no sense continuous with, or development of the second of the two schemes presented above. In fact, it shares the chronological starting point of the first of those schemes in which the Quendi awake in VY 1000, and the second generation begins to appear in VY 1000/9, and so conceptually precedes the second scheme, in which the Quendi awake in VY 1386. As mentioned in the editorial notes, the verso of this last sheet appears to be draft material for the first scheme presented above. Moreover, the first line of that first scheme echoes the final line of that draft material. It might be thought then that this scheme is continuous with that drafting, i.e., that it is in fact the first and earliest of the schemes in this bundle. But if so, it adheres less strictly to the contents of that drafting than does the first scheme presented above, and that the intervals between birth and next gestation don't begin to increase until the 5th gen, and neither is there a percentage reduction in wedded pairs until the 5th gen, where it is 5% as it is in the 6th gen. I cannot therefore with assurance place this scheme chronologically with respect to the preceding schemes. Nonetheless, since Tolkien both retained the sheet and did not strike its recto through, I present it here in its bundle order. Thus, the Quendi awake in VY 1000, number 144. The second gen appears in VY 1000/9. Gen. Footnote 15. Tolkien here actually started the generations from 1, not 2, but in doing so he must have meant generations after the first elves, who strictly speaking were not generated in the womb. I have altered the generation numbering to accord with that which Tolkien used everywhere else to avoid confusion. End footnote. 2. By VY 1001, the increase is 72 times 6 equals 432. Population 576. Footnote 16. Tolkien miscalculated the total population of the second gen as 572. It should be 144 plus 432 equals 576, and carried this error through the rest of his population tally. I have corrected this error throughout. End footnote. Gen 3. By VY 1000/9 plus VY 14/9 equals 1014/18, the third gen will begin to appear. It will be complete in VY 1015/18 with an increase being 432 over 2 equals 216 times 6 equals 1296. Population 1872. Gen 4 by 1014/18 plus VY 14/9 equals 1028/27. The fourth gen will begin to appear. It will be completed in 1029/27. Increase is 1296 over 2 equals 648 times 6 equals 3888. Population is 5760. Gen 5 by 1028/27 plus VY 14/9 equals 1042/36. The fifth gen will begin to appear. It will be completed in 1043/36. Increase is 3888 over 2 equals 1944 times 6 equals 11,664. Population is 17,424. In Gen 6 by 1042/36 plus VY 26/9 equals 1068/45. The sixth gen will begin to appear. It will be completed in 1070/45. Increase is 11,664 minus 580 or 5% over 2 equals 11,084 over 2 times 5 equals 27,710. Total population is 45,134. In Gen 7 by 1068/45 plus VY 26/9 equals 1094/54. The seventh gen will begin to appear. It will be completed in 1096/54. Increase is 27,710 minus 1385, 5% over 2 equals 26,325 over 2. Say 13,100 times 5 equals 65,500, and the total population 110,634. Footnote 17. Tolkien here miscalculated 13,100 times 5 as 75,500 and thus the total as 120,634. I have corrected the error. End footnote. Before the seventh gen was produced, Orome arrives in VY 1085. A better calculation. First elves produced the second generation at once. It begins their